Now it is that time of the month again where we get our special guest, Ambassador Yunyo Chol, into the studio to talk all things international diplomacy on global affairs, on the global affairs stage at least. And it's a very good morning to you, Ambassador. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Cruising through. It's a bit warmer than it was at the start of the week, so that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
But it is definitely winter here, isn't it? And speaking of cold situations, the places that might have been a bit cold around the tables at COP26, which we talked about last time you were in the studio. Now, they've finished their sessions. How did it all go? Because you had expressed some concerns about the lack of will from some major emitters, yeah?
Right. The conference finished its work in the evening of November 13th, Saturday. There was no breakthrough or big success, but we can say we have some progress. Was it enough? Well, only time and our collection actions from now will tell. The United Nations has set the three criteria for success for this COP, including pledges to cut carbon dioxide emissions in half by 2030 and $100 billion in financial aid from rich nations to poor, and ensuring that half of that money went to helping the developing world adapt to the worst effects of climate change. But none seems to have been achieved. But the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, says we now have some building blocks for progress. And the conference president, Minister Alok Sharma of the United Kingdom, said we have kept 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. And John Kerry, the U.S. Special Envoy, also said, we are closer than we have ever been before to avoiding climate chaos and securing clean air, safer water, and healthier planet. So the responsible people are trying to see the silver lining out of this seemingly imperfect deal.
Yeah. Now, what's in the Glasgow Pact then that's going to do that?
Well, the pact for the first time includes language that asks countries to reduce their reliance on coal and roll back fossil fuel subsidies, the energy sources that are primary drivers of man-made climate change. The deal made some headway on the demands of the poor and vulnerable countries that wealthy countries who are responsible for most emissions should pay up. In 2009, rich countries agreed to create a $100 billion fund to assist the poor by 2020, but that fund was not ready yet. So this time, the pact urges developed countries to double their collective provision of climate finance for adaptation to developing countries from 2019 levels by 2025. And it also made mention of loss and damage, which means the costs that some countries are already facing from climate change. And those countries have for years wanted payment to help deal with it. So, finally, the parties also agreed on setting rules for carbon markets, which will potentially unlock, again, trillions of dollars for protecting forests, building renewable energy facilities, and other projects to combat climate change. Under the accord, measures will be in place to ensure carbon credits are not double counted under national emission targets.
Yeah, those are some interesting developments there. There was some real drama in the last couple of minutes,
right,
of this, and some language changed in the documents. So what was the last minute change to the text of this pact?
Well, India, a major coal-producing country and the third biggest greenhouse gas emitter with the worst air pollution in the world, insisted upon the last-minute change from phase out the use of unabated coal to phase down.
Right.
Phase out means there will be no coal consumption at the end, but phase down is keeping the option of using coal power at whatever minimum level. So many negotiators got very upset about this somewhat irresponsible move, but the conference president, Minister Sharma, swallowed the compromise to make the deal and take a step forward.
Yeah, you could see on some of the faces of the people who must have been in those rooms talking about that Not looking exactly stoked with the idea, but still pretty happy that they got something. A phase down is better than nothing, was probably what he had to swallow there, the minister. But what is the future of the COP meetings and obviously in the larger scheme of things, humanity's response to climate change?
Well, the parties were to renew and update their pledges every 5 years to get closer to their original targets. But this time they all realized that current pledges fall far short of their goals. And they decided to make this cycle an annual one and come back next year, 2022, not 2025, with improved pledges to COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And the negotiators say that the current pledges are so weak that the goal of, again, 1.5 degrees limit is practically on a life support. Under the circumstances, it is estimated that the rise will be between 1.9 and 3.0 degrees, with the average of 2.4 degrees. To fill the gap, we need to cut 23 to 27 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions every year, which is a huge challenge. So every party should do some serious homework before coming back to the next COP.
Right. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're a pragmatist, you're probably looking at COP26 and saying, well, we are sort of just kicking the can down the road to another year, see what we get next year. We can come back and see if we can make something a little bit more ironclad. But just domestically, how did the Korean delegation contribute to this outcome then?
The Korean delegation helped reaching the deal by actively participating in deliberation of most agenda items and supporting the annual stocktaking instead of 5 years interval. The Korean president, in his address, proposed an annual youth climate forum to engage the future generation in this important work. And his proposal was included in the final text of the pact. So from now on, the Korean government will work on the specific plans for its pledges of 40% reduction by 2030, as well as net zero by 2050, which they should bring to the next COP. They will also explore concrete ways to utilize carbon trading market under the new rules to meet its target.
Right. So you also have a book that you'd like to recommend on this issue, yeah?
Yeah, this book came out in mid-October with the title The 12 Issues in the Age of Climate Crisis, or in Korean, 기후 위기 시대 12가지 쟁점. The editor of this book is Professor Jung Tae-young of Yonsei University School of International Studies, who is a lead author of the latest assessment report by IPCC and happened to be a good friend of mine.
Well, there you go.
The book starts with a chapter written by a high school girl who advises what the Korean government and older generation are missing in their climate policies. And there are 12 experts who examine various aspects linked to the climate change, such as water management and finance and technology, energy transition, and carbon markets. These experts make recommendations emphasizing, among others, the importance of engaging the future generation and green credit policy by central bank, and plan to take care of people out of fossil fuel industries. This is very important.
Yeah.
And the disclosure of information to consumers on what kind of resources have been used for a product.
Right. That leads into something my mum always said, which was think globally, act locally.
Exactly.
She was saying it before it was cool, though. So I'll take my hat off to mum there. She was definitely ahead of her time. But they're all good policy recommendations. But what can we do then as citizens at the individual level?
Do you remember the expression "consumer is the king"?
Yep.
Maybe it's a Korean one. 소비자는 왕이다. I think it is all the more true now with the two-way traffic of information between the producers and consumers, which pushes producers to reflect and cater to the preferences of consumers. So the citizens and the consumers, particularly the younger generations, can make real differences in the government policy as well as business practices of private sector. The MZ generation, in particular, has a distinct tendency to take environment, social responsibility, and justice more seriously, and will play a central role in our fight against climate change. So we should make our preferences clear. We want a green earth, and we want our children and their children to enjoy their clean and beautiful environment.
That is true, and good advice there. Now, yourself personally, you're going to hold out any hope there's going to be a cure to this climate crisis?
Well, recently I heard a lecture given by Mr. Al Gore, a former U.S. Vice President and a Nobel laureate for his work on climate change. And he said, once we reach net zero, hopefully by 2050, our target year, the temperature increase will stop in 3 to 5 years from that time. And half of the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere will be eliminated in 25 to 30 years from that. It'll be around 2080 when our children's children may be running our society. So we can do it, and we should do it. Every little effort counts, so let's do it.
That's actually a great point. We do often underestimate how powerful the Earth can be to replenish itself. And if you think about that, 2080, it's not that far away when you think about it, right? You're talking about your children's children and grandchildren, really. And so, you do definitely want to be part of that generation that did something, right?
We should.
That saved the world, if you will. So it is on every one of us to do our little bit. Well, thank you very much for that, Ambassador, and we'll catch up with you again next month.
Thank you, Alex.